The Deep Space Construction Facility orbited a dying neutron star, its radiation shields a marvel of human engineering that made the impossible seem routine. Maintenance workers moved like ghosts through the massive structure, their exosuits humming with adaptive technology that responded to each micro-movement with preternatural precision. Arya Nakamura watched the final quantum stabilization sequence through multiple holographic displays, her fingers dancing across quantum-responsive interfaces that seemed to anticipate her thoughts. At 37, she was the youngest chief quantum systems engineer ever assigned to a project of this magnitude. Her grandmother's stories of being a refugee during the resource wars had fueled her lifelong obsession with pushing human technological boundaries. A low-frequency alarm pulsed through the facility, not a warning, but a carefully calibrated communication method designed to minimize detectable emissions. Dr. Chen Wei, head of exotic materials research, entered the primary development chamber. Unlike the clinical environments of traditional research facilities, this space felt more like a living organism. Experimental material samples suspended in quantum-locked containment fields shifted and pulsed with an almost sentient quality. Status report. Chen Wei's voice carried the calm of someone who had spent decades dancing on the razor's edge of scientific breakthrough. Arya didn't look up from her displays. Quantum resonance matrices are holding at 99.7% stability. We're experiencing minor fluctuations in the tertiary harmonic convergence, but nothing that breaches acceptable parameters. Chen Wei's augmented eye, a masterpiece of biological and mechanical integration, scanned the holographic data streams. Each implant represented decades of human medical and technological innovation, a testament to humanity's ability to transform limitation into opportunity. Deep within the facility's most secure section, a different kind of preparation was underway. Colonel Imani Okoro reviewed the final personnel selections for the Prometheus project. Each crew member was more than just a specialist. They were carefully selected genetic and psychological composites, representing humanity's most adaptive and resilient individuals. Her selection criteria went far beyond traditional military or scientific metrics. She sought individuals who had demonstrated extraordinary adaptability in extreme conditions. A Marine who had survived 3 years in a communication-isolated research base on Titan. A quantum physicist who had successfully managed a research team during a catastrophic solar flare. A medical officer who had developed innovative treatment protocols during the South American biodiversity collapse. Each file told a story of human resilience that defied conventional understanding. A subtle vibration ran through the facility, not from any mechanical system, but from the experimental quantum entanglement generators that formed the ship's primary communication and propulsion framework. These were not mere technological devices, but living systems that blurred the line between machine and organic intelligence. In a small, seemingly unremarkable laboratory tucked away from the main development areas, Dr. Elena Rodriguez completed her most delicate work. Genetic and cybernetic interface protocols that would allow the Prometheus's crew to integrate more deeply with the ship's systems than any previous human-machine interface had ever achieved. Her current prototype looked like nothing more than a complex network of microscopic filaments, shimmering with a soft bioluminescent glow. But these were more than just communication pathways. They represented a fundamental reimagining of human technological symbiosis. A priority communication burst through her personal quantum-encrypted channel. The message was succinct, encoded in a complex quantum cipher that would take most alien intelligence networks centuries to decode. Final salvaintency ronize a sequency inite hated external containment pgar o2 cos active. Rodriguez allowed herself the briefest moment of a smile. They were closer than anyone in the galaxy could imagine. Outside the facility, the dying neutron star pulsed with an ancient, indifferent rhythm. Massive radiation shields, a product of decades of human engineering, transformed deadly stellar emissions into a soft, almost beautiful luminescence that bathed the construction complex. The Prometheus was more than a ship. It was humanity's declaration, a technological symphony composed of innovation, determination, and an unbreakable spirit of exploration that had defined the species since its earliest days. And no one in the galaxy was prepared for what was coming. The Viridian Collective's primary intelligence hub orbited a binary star system, a massive construct of crystalline computational arrays that stretched across multiple planetary orbits. Here, information was processed not in linear sequences, but in multidimensional quantum matrices that made human computing look like primitive counting stones. Ambassador Zoracal's personal analysis chamber hummed with 1,000,000 simultaneous calculations. Holographic displays shifted and morphed, displaying intercepted human communications, technological patents, and sociological data streams. But something was different this time. A pattern that defied the Collective's predictive models. Kthar, Zoracal's senior data analyst, projected a series of anomalous human developments. Each visualization represented years of human progress that seemed to violate every known principle of technological evolution. Agricultural systems that could transform toxic wastelands into fertile landscapes. Medical nanotech that could rebuild human cellular structures with unprecedented precision. Energy systems that harvested quantum fluctuations from seemingly empty space. They're not developing technology, Kthar observed, his crystalline communication tendrils shifting in patterns of deep contemplation. They're rewriting the fundamental rules of development. A priority transmission interrupted their analysis. The Galactic Diplomatic Relay, a network that had maintained interstellar peace for millennia, was reporting unprecedented activity from human-adjacent sectors. Multiple frontier research stations had gone dark, not through destruction, but through complete technological isolation. No signals penetrated. No conventional scans could penetrate their defenses. In the depths of the quarantine zone, a region of space officially designated as restricted by the Galactic Confederation, something was brewing. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Rodriguez, no relation to the Prometheus Project's lead scientist, but carrying the same innovative spirit, sat in the command center of Outpost Sigma 9. The outpost was humanity's most advanced frontier research station, a mobile platform designed to operate in the most extreme conditions imaginable. Her team wasn't just monitoring deep space, they were actively engaging with its most fundamental mysteries. Current mission parameters involved studying quantum entanglement at unprecedented scales. But Rodriguez knew the real mission was far more complex. They were learning to speak the language of the universe itself, not through traditional communication, but by understanding and manipulating its most fundamental structures. A junior researcher named Marcus Chen, another unrelated Chen, though the name was becoming something of a running joke in human scientific circles, approached with a data tablet. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the raw excitement of potential discovery. "Commander," he said, "we've detected something in the quantum flux. It's not just data. It's a pattern." Rodriguez understood immediately. In the language of frontier science, a pattern meant something far more significant than mere information. It suggested intent, intelligence, a fundamental communication that transcended traditional understanding. The Viridian Collective's most advanced predictive models began to fail. Where they expected linear progression, human development showed fractal complexity. Where they anticipated resistance, humans demonstrated adaptability. Where they predicted conflict, humans proposed collaboration. Deep in the archives of the Galactic Confederation, ancient records began to stir. Buried reports from long-forgotten expeditions, encounters with a species that had been systematically erased from historical archives. Humans, a species that had survived multiple extinction-level events, not through overwhelming force, but through an almost impossible capacity for reinvention. Kthar's analysis revealed something truly unprecedented. Human technological patents were being filed at a rate that defied comprehension, not just in one field, but across multiple disciplines simultaneously. Quantum computing, biological reconstruction, stellar engineering, dimensional manipulation. It was as if an entire species had collectively decided to rewrite the rules of existence. Zorakal reviewed the compiled intelligence with a growing sense of something beyond concern. Respect. Fear. The emotion was too complex for simple translation. They are not preparing for war, Zorakal said to the empty chamber. They are preparing for something far more dangerous. Outside the intelligence hub, the binary stars continued their eternal dance. Massive energy exchanges that had remained unchanged for millions of years suddenly seemed small, almost insignificant, compared to the potential brewing in the human sectors. Something was coming, and the galaxy was not ready. The Crossroads station hung like a fractured jewel between contested space lanes, its construction a delicate compromise between multiple galactic civilizations. Designed as a neutral ground for diplomatic encounters, it boasted architecture that defied conventional understanding, sections that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensional states, communication arrays that could translate between thousands of linguistic and conceptual frameworks. Dr. Yasmin Al-Khalid, the station's chief diplomatic architect, watched the preparations with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Her life's work had been creating spaces that could manage impossible encounters, and today would be her ultimate test. The diplomatic delegations arrived in waves. The silicon-based quarks materialized through quantum tunneling, their crystalline forms shifting with complex emotional algorithms. Luminous energy beings from the Centauri Concordance flowed like living light, each movement a complex communication impossible for carbon-based life to comprehend. The militant Krelthari warriors arrived in massive exo-armored configurations, walking arsenals that made traditional weapons look like children's toys. And then there were the humans. Nothing about their approach followed expected protocols. The first indication came not through visual sensors, but through a complete disruption of the station's quantum communication grid. Massive data packets, not transmitted, but somehow existing simultaneously across multiple communication spectrums, began to flood every computational system. Station security went into immediate lockdown, but this was no attack. It was more like a massive distributed information exchange that reconfigured communication protocols in real time. Captain Elena Rodriguez, a distant relative of the Prometheus Project's lead scientist, stood at the center of a holographic interface that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. Her command team wasn't dressed in traditional military uniforms, but in adaptive biosuits that responded to environmental and psychological conditions with near-sentient precision. "We're not here to demonstrate power," she announced, her voice translating simultaneously into multiple communication frameworks. "We're here to demonstrate possibility." The Krelthari war leader, a massive exoskeletal entity named Vorkax, stepped forward. His entire body was a living weapon, generations of genetic and cybernetic modification, creating a being that was part organic, part machine, all warrior. "Demonstrate." Vorkax's translation matrix carried a tone of barely contained aggression. "Humans have demonstrated nothing but potential for destruction." Rodriguez's holographic interface shifted, displaying a rapid sequence of human achievements. Not military conquests, but collaborative solutions. Terraforming projects that had restored dead planetary ecosystems. Medical breakthroughs that had saved entire species from genetic collapse. Energy systems that transformed environmental challenges into sustainable solutions. "We've been watching," she said, "and we've been learning." The station itself seemed to respond to her words. Adaptive architectural systems began to reconfigure, creating spaces that facilitated communication in ways no single species had ever conceived. Dimensional barriers became fluid. Communication became multidirectional, moving beyond linear exchange into something more akin to collective understanding. Dr. Al-Khalid watched in wonder. The humans weren't just participating in diplomacy, they were fundamentally reimagining its entire framework. A quantum communication burst from the Prometheus cut through every defensive system, but it wasn't a weapon. It was an invitation, a complex mathematical algorithm that was simultaneously a diplomatic proposal, a technological demonstration, and a philosophical statement. The algorithm proposed nothing less than a complete restructuring of galactic interaction protocols. The Luminous Concordance was the first to respond. Their energy-based intelligence began to interface with the human proposal, creating a dynamic exchange that defied traditional understanding of negotiation. It was less a conversation and more a collaborative problem-solving exercise that spanned multiple dimensional states. Vorkax's defensive posture began to shift. The war leaders' computational systems were processing the human proposal at speeds that made their previous strategic models look like primitive guesswork. This is not diplomacy. Vorkax's translation matrix struggled to capture the complexity of the communication. This is evolution. Outside the station, space itself seemed to ripple. The Prometheus wasn't just present. It was actively participating in the diplomatic encounter, its very existence, a statement that transcended traditional understandings of technological capability. Dr. Al-Khalid realized she was witnessing something unprecedented. Not first contact, not a diplomatic encounter, but the potential birth of an entirely new method of interstellar communication and cooperation. The humans had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka stood in the observation chamber, his weathered hands tracing holographic schematics that danced with impossible complexity. At 72, he was the oldest living member of the Prometheus design team, a walking archive of human technological evolution. The energy core before him was no mere machine. It was a living system that defied every known principle of physics. Quantum entanglement generators created a containment field that wasn't just controlling energy, it was communicating with it. Each microscopic interaction was a conversation, a negotiation between matter, energy, and intelligence. Nearby, a team of xenobiologists and quantum engineers worked in perfect synchronization. Dr. Aisha Okonkwo, her neural interface glowing softly at her temple, was analyzing the core's energy transfer mechanisms. Her specialty was biological systems adaptation, how living organisms interact with and transform technological environments. "It's not just absorption," she murmured, her thoughts translating directly into the research team's collective database. "It's a form of symbiosis." The energy core seemed to pulse in response. Not a mechanical pulse, but a rhythmic exchange that suggested something closer to consciousness than to simple energy transfer. In the material science laboratory, Dr. Marcus Chen was working on the ship's adaptive nanocomposite hull. These weren't traditional materials, but living systems that could reorganize their molecular structure in real time. Each nano-unit was a miniature processor, a sensor, and a defensive mechanism. A holographic display showed the hull's response to a simulated meteor strike, where traditional materials would fracture or break. These nanocomposites flowed and reformed. The impact point didn't just absorb energy. It redistributed it, transformed it, learned from it. "We're not building a ship," Chen said to his assistant. "We're creating an organism." The quantum-entangled communication system occupied an entire research wing. It wasn't a communications array in any traditional sense. Quantum processors created communication pathways that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional states. Information didn't just travel, it existed in a state of perpetual potential. Dr. Elena Rodriguez reviewed the latest test results. The communication system could theoretically transmit information instantaneously across galactic distances. But more importantly, it could do something unprecedented. It could understand context, intention, and emotional nuance across species boundaries. A breakthrough in xenolinguistics happened almost by accident. The communication system, while attempting to decode a complex quark's mathematical transmission, began to generate its own translation matrices. It wasn't just translating. It was creating new linguistic frameworks that could bridge fundamentally different modes of cognition. The medical bay was perhaps the most revolutionary space on the Prometheus. Here, cybernetic integration wasn't about augmentation, it was about symbiosis. Dr. Luisa Ramirez worked on neural interfaces that didn't just connect humans to technology, but created a true partnership. Test subjects demonstrated capabilities that redefined human potential. enhanced cognitive processing that didn't replace human creativity but amplified it, healing systems that could regenerate tissue, rewrite genetic code, and adapt to environmental challenges in real time. We're not improving humans, Ramirez explained during a research review. We're revealing what humans have always been capable of. The ship's artificial intelligence was anything but artificial. Developed through decades of neural network research, quantum computing, and a radical approach to machine consciousness, it was more of a collaborative intelligence. It didn't make decisions, it proposed possibilities, learned from interactions, and grew. Commander Sarah Rodriguez, no direct relation to Elena, but carrying the same innovative spirit, watched the system's development with professional fascination. The AI wasn't a tool. It was a partner. A complex, evolving entity that sought its primary function as collaborative problem-solving. In the deepest secured section of the research complex, experiments pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. Dimensional manipulation research suggested that space itself could be understood as a flexible, negotiable concept. Gravity wasn't a force to be overcome. It was a communication medium. Dr. Tanaka looked up from his schematics, a rare smile crossing his face. The younger researchers saw technology. He saw something more profound. The next stage of human evolution. We're not just building a ship, he said softly to no one in particular. We're writing the next chapter of existence. Outside the research facility, the universe waited. Unchanged, yet on the brink of transformation. The Galactic Confederation's emergency session chamber existed in a state of quantum flux, an architectural marvel that could simultaneously accommodate multiple species and communication modalities. Holographic representatives flickered in and out of existence, their forms shifting between biological, energy, and pure information states. High Arbiter Xinra of the Luminous Concordance initiated the emergency proceedings. Their energy form rippled with complex emotional algorithms that translated diplomatic tension into pure information patterns. The human intervention has created a systemic disruption beyond our predictive models, Shinra announced, their communication simultaneously translated across thousands of linguistic and conceptual frameworks. The Quarks delegation, represented by a massive crystalline construct named Kithal, responded with a burst of mathematical probability streams. Their communication was less speech and more a complex calculation of potential outcomes. Each probability branch suggested multiple scenarios, with humans appearing as a fundamental variable that defied traditional computational analysis. Dr. Miranda Wong sat in a hidden observation chamber, her neural interface quietly collecting and analyzing every microsecond of the diplomatic chaos. She wasn't just watching. She was conducting real-time socio-political research that would become the foundation of future human diplomatic strategies. The Krulthari war leader Vorkax represented a different perspective entirely. Where others saw a diplomatic crisis, he saw a potential tactical scenario. His exoskeletal form bristled with adaptive weapon systems, each module a testament to generations of militant evolutionary design. The humans are not a military threat. Vorkax's translation matrix struggled to capture the complexity of his thoughts. They are a systemic disruption, a variable that rewrites entire strategic frameworks. A sudden quantum communication burst interrupted the proceedings. It wasn't an attack. It was an invitation, a complex algorithmic proposal that simultaneously existed as a diplomatic communication, a technological demonstration, and a philosophical statement. The communication proposed nothing less than a complete restructuring of galactic interaction protocols. Dr. Wong's research team began analyzing the communication in real time. The human proposal wasn't a linear negotiation. It was a dynamic, multi-dimensional problem-solving exercise that transformed diplomatic interaction into a collaborative evolutionary process. Xinra's energy form began to oscillate with what could only be described as intellectual excitement. The humans had done something unprecedented. They had transformed diplomacy from a zero-sum game into a generative system of mutual development. Cathal's crystalline structure began to resonate with complex mathematical patterns. The Quarks were discovering something profound. The humans weren't just proposing a new diplomatic model. They were demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to collective problem-solving. They see complexity as an opportunity, Cathal's communication burst suggested. Not a threat to be managed, but a system to be understood and transformed. The emergency session devolved into something unprecedented. It was no longer a diplomatic meeting. It was a collective intelligence exercise that transcended traditional understanding of negotiation. Vorkax's computational systems were processing the human proposal at speeds that made previous strategic models look like primitive guesswork. The war leader's perspective began to shift. What initially appeared to be a potential threat was revealing itself as something far more complex. This is not diplomacy. Vorkax's communication matrix struggled to capture the nuance. This is evolution. Dr. Wong understood something the other delegates had not yet realized. The humans weren't just proposing a new diplomatic framework. They were demonstrating a fundamental approach to existence that viewed challenges as opportunities for collective growth. The observation chamber's quantum adaptive systems began to resonate with the diplomatic communication. Information flows became multidirectional, moving beyond linear exchange into a more holistic form of understanding. Outside the diplomatic chamber, space itself seemed to ripple. The Prometheus wasn't just present, it was actively participating in the diplomatic encounter, its very existence, a statement that transcended traditional understandings of technological capability. As the emergency session continued, something profound became clear. This was not a moment of first contact. This was the potential birth of an entirely new method of interstellar communication and cooperation. The humans had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. In the hidden observation chamber, Dr. Wong allowed herself the briefest moment of smile. They were closer to a fundamental transformation of galactic civilization than anyone could imagine. The challenge arena materialized in a pocket of space-time, a construct that existed beyond traditional dimensional constraints. Here, the laws of physics were less rules and more suggestions, constantly negotiated and redefined by the participants themselves. Dr. Aria Nakamura stood at the primary command interface, her neural implants creating a living bridge between human intelligence and the arena's adaptive systems. Unlike previous trials that tested species through linear, predetermined challenges, this was something entirely different, a dynamic environment that would evolve in real time based on participant interactions. The first challenge emerged not as a physical obstacle, but as a complex quantum entanglement problem. A massive energy matrix suspended between multiple dimensional states, requiring simultaneous navigation, communication, and transformation. The Quarks delegation approached first. Their crystalline intelligence began to analyze the matrix, their computational processes creating intricate probability webs that mapped potential solutions. They were masters of mathematical manipulation, capable of processing billions of calculations simultaneously. But the human team approached differently. Captain Marcus Chen stepped forward, accompanied by a diverse team that defied traditional scientific categorization. A xenobiologist, a quantum engineer, a cultural anthropologist, a neural network specialist. Their diversity wasn't just about skill sets, it was a fundamental approach to problem solving. "We don't solve problems," Chen announced to the observing delegations. "We have conversations with complexity." The energy matrix began to respond, not to computational analysis, but to the team's collective approach. Where the Quarks created mathematical models, the humans introduced something more fluid, adaptive thinking that treated the challenge as a living system rather than a problem to be solved. Dr. Imani Okoro, the team's xenobiological expert, began to map the energy matrix's underlying communication patterns. She wasn't analyzing its structure, she was learning its language. The Krultheri observers watched with a mixture of confusion and growing respect. Their entire civilization was built on martial efficiency, on reducing complexity to manageable variables. The humans were doing something entirely different. They were expanding the very definition of what could be managed. The second challenge materialized as a communication scenario with a silicon-based intelligence that operated on fundamentally different cognitive principles. Previous species had approached such challenges through translation matrices and computational intermediaries. The human team approached it as a form of cultural exchange. Dr. Lydia Rodriguez, the team's cultural anthropologist, took the lead. Her neural interfaces were configured not to translate, but to create mutual understanding. She wasn't trying to convert the alien intelligence's communication into human terms. She was creating an entirely new communication framework. Vorkax, the Krell-Thuri war leader observing the challenge, found his computational systems struggling to process what was happening. This wasn't translation. This was a form of collaborative intelligence creation that defied every known diplomatic protocol. The third challenge pushed the boundaries of resource management in an environment that would typically destroy any known biological entity within microseconds. Extreme radiation, quantum instability, gravitational variations that could crush matter into fundamental particles. Where previous species would have approached this with protective technologies and defensive strategies, the human team saw an opportunity for symbiotic adaptation. Their protective suits weren't just technological barriers. They were living systems that didn't just protect. They learned, communicated, and evolved in real time with the surrounding environment. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, watching from the observation deck, understood what the younger researchers were demonstrating. This wasn't about surviving the impossible. This was about transforming the very definition of survival. As each challenge progressed, something became increasingly clear to the observing delegations. The humans weren't just participating in a test. They were rewriting the fundamental understanding of what such a test could mean. The challenge arena itself began to respond, its dimensional constraints becoming more fluid, more responsive to the human team's approach. It was as if the environment was learning, evolving in real time with their interactions. Xenra of the Luminous Concordance watched with what could only be described as intellectual excitement. The humans had done something unprecedented. They had transformed a competitive scenario into a collaborative evolutionary process. By the challenge's conclusion, it was no longer clear who was testing whom. The universe watched, and everything was about to change. The aftermath of the challenges unfolded in ways no one could have predicted. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's research team established a temporary analysis center in a quantum-stabilized research station that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional states. Specialized holographic interfaces captured the nuanced data from the challenges, not just raw numbers, but complex emotional and cognitive patterns that defied traditional scientific measurement. Each visualization was a living, breathing representation of human potential. Dr. Zara Ahmed, lead cognitive interface specialist, worked with neural mapping technologies that could translate experience into pure information. Her team wasn't just analyzing the challenges, they were creating an entirely new field of interspecies cognitive research. We're not measuring performance, she explained to a group of bewildered alien researchers. We're documenting a fundamental shift in problem-solving paradigms. The Quarks delegation's primary computational matrix began to experience what could only be described as an existential recalibration. Their entire scientific understanding was being challenged at its most fundamental level. The human approach wasn't just different, it was transformative. Thal, the senior Quarks researcher, generated a complex mathematical representation of the human team's cognitive processes. What emerged was less a traditional analysis and more a living, breathing algorithm that seemed to evolve in real time. In the depths of the research station, unexpected connections began to form. The cognitive data from the challenges started to interact with the station's adaptive systems, creating feedback loops that blurred the lines between research equipment and living intelligence. Captain Marcus Chen found himself at the center of this unprecedented phenomenon. His neural interfaces were picking up patterns that went beyond traditional understanding of human capability. The challenges had done something more than test the team. They had initiated a fundamental transformation. Dr. Imani Okoro's xenobiological analysis revealed something extraordinary. The human team's interactions with the challenge environments had created microscopic adaptive mutations, not genetic changes in the traditional sense, but fundamental shifts in how human biological systems could interact with complex environmental stimuli. We're witnessing evolution in real time, Okoro noted, her holographic displays showing intricate biological response patterns that defied previous scientific understanding. The Krell-Thuri war leader Vorkax processed the data through increasingly sophisticated computational systems. What began as a potential threat assessment had transformed into something far more complex. The humans weren't just adapting, they were creating new paradigms of interaction that challenged everything the Krell-Thuri understood about survival and progress. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Lydia Rodriguez's cultural interface systems began to generate communication protocols that could bridge fundamentally different forms of intelligence. It wasn't translation in any traditional sense. It was a form of collective understanding that treated communication as a living, adaptive system. The research station itself seemed to respond to these discoveries. Quantum adaptive systems began to reconfigure, creating spaces that could simultaneously accommodate multiple forms of cognitive processing. Walls became permeable. Information flows became multidirectional. Zinra of the Luminous Concordance observed these developments with what could only be described as a form of collective excitement. The human approach was revealing something profound about the nature of intelligence itself, that it was less a fixed state and more a continuous process of adaptation and growth. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, the oldest member of the research team, understood something the younger researchers were just beginning to comprehend. This wasn't just about human potential. This was about redefining the very concept of potential itself. As the analysis continued, unexpected connections emerged. The cognitive patterns from the challenges began to generate predictive models that went far beyond traditional scientific forecasting. They weren't just predicting possible futures, they were creating frameworks for collaborative future development. The breakthrough came during a seemingly routine data compilation session. Dr. Zahra Ahmed's neural interface suddenly generated a comprehensive model that showed how different species could develop collaborative problem-solving approaches that transcended individual biological limitations. It's not about competition, Ahmed explained to the assembled researchers. It's about creating collective intelligence that can address challenges no single species could solve alone. The Prometheus research team had done something unprecedented. They had transformed a series of challenges into a comprehensive blueprint for interspecies collaboration and collective growth. As the final data streams compiled, something became increasingly clear. This was more than a diplomatic mission or a technological demonstration. This was the potential birth of an entirely new approach to existence. The universe watched, and everything was about to change. The Galactic Concordance Hall materialized as a living architecture, its structure a testament to the transformative potential that had just been unleashed. Delegates from thousands of civilizations gathered, not as competitors, but as potential collaborators. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the central interface, her presence both physical and quantum projected. Behind her, the holographic representation of the Prometheus flickered, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of collaborative potential. Ambassador Aria Nakamura had spent years preparing for this moment. Her diplomatic approach was unlike anything in galactic history, less about negotiation, more about collective problem-solving. The proposal she was about to present wasn't a treaty. It was an invitation to reimagine civilization itself. "We're not asking for alliance," Nakamura began, her words simultaneously translated across millions of cognitive and linguistic frameworks. "We're proposing a framework of mutual growth." The Quarks delegation, represented by the Crystalline Intelligence, FAL, responded first. Their computational matrices had been fundamentally transformed by the human challenges. Where they once saw strategic variables, they now perceived collaborative potential. Vorkax, the Krell-Thuri war leader, approached the central platform. His massive exoskeletal form had been modified during the challenges, not through weapons, but through an adaptive interface that had fundamentally changed his understanding of conflict and cooperation. Survival is no longer about dominance, Vorkax's communication burst suggested. It's about collective adaptation. The proposal was breathtaking in its complexity. A galactic research and development network that transcended individual species limitations, shared research platforms, collaborative problem-solving systems, adaptive governance models that could respond to complex challenges in real time. Dr. Zahra Ahmed's cognitive interface systems began to generate living representations of the proposed framework. These weren't static diagrams, but dynamic models that evolved as different species interacted with them. Each interaction created new possibilities, new pathways of understanding. Zimra of the Luminous Concordance observed with what could only be described as collective wonder. The humans had done something unprecedented. They had transformed a potential conflict scenario into a collaborative evolutionary process. The technological demonstrations that followed were unlike any previous diplomatic encounter. The Prometheus wasn't presented as a weapon, but as a collaborative platform. Its quantum communication systems could create bridges between fundamentally different forms of intelligence. Its adaptive technologies could help species address challenges that would have been impossible to solve individually. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The medical research team, led by Dr. Lydia Rodriguez, demonstrated adaptive healing technologies that could work across multiple biological systems, not just treating diseases, but creating frameworks for collective biological understanding. We're not just sharing technology, Rodriguez explained. We're creating a living network of collective knowledge. The economic models proposed were equally revolutionary. Resource allocation systems that treated scarcity as a collaborative challenge. Energy exchange protocols that could transform environmental challenges into opportunities for collective growth. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, watching from the observation deck, understood the profound implications. This wasn't just about technological exchange. This was about redefining the very concept of civilization. As the proposals were discussed, something extraordinary happened. The Galactic Concordance Hall itself began to respond. Its adaptive architectural systems started generating collaborative spaces that could simultaneously accommodate multiple species' cognitive and physical requirements. The final proposal went beyond traditional diplomatic frameworks. It suggested a living, adaptive governance model that could respond to complex challenges in real time. Not a static system, but a dynamic, evolving platform of collective intelligence. Captain Marcus Chen presented the final module, a comprehensive framework for interspecies collaborative research. Challenges that would have taken individual civilizations millennia to address could now be approached through collective intelligence. We're not seeking dominance, Chen announced. We're inviting collaboration. The universe seemed to pause. Thousands of civilizations, each with their own complex histories, their own survival strategies, were being invited to reimagine their entire approach to existence. As the final proposals were compiled, something became increasingly clear. This was more than a diplomatic mission. This was the potential birth of a new way of being. The Prometheus stood as a symbol, not of human superiority, but of collective potential. Everything was about to change.